Hey guys, this is Matt with Buckhorn Hill Outdoors. I've shot traditional bows and bow hunted for almost 40 years. During that time, I've learned a lot. I know what works and what doesn't work. I've compiled 4 different methods of bow tuning, traditional bow tuning that is, in this video, and I'd like to show you guys how I do it. In this method, I'm going to talk about bare shaft tuning, paper tuning, Fletched arrow shaft tuning, and what I like to call the simple bow tuning method. That's a real interesting way to do it. You know, there's lots of guys coming into trad bow hunting that have come straight from a compound. They're sick of fooling with gadgets and tuning and tinkering. They just want to grab their arrows, get them a bow, and go out to shoot. I think this method will suit them real fine. All of these methods work good, so watch along, choose which way you like, and let's get into it. Woo! I love shooting at reactive targets. Guys, today I'm going to be talking about bare shaft tuning a traditional bow. There are many different ways you can tune a trad bow, and I'm going to do different videos on each way, but today I want to talk about my favorite method, and that is bare shaft tuning. If you like this, please like and subscribe. That way I'll know to do more of this kind of content. Let's jump right into this. Tuning your bow to get perfect arrow flight can be really beneficial. One, it is going to give you a little bit more accuracy. Now, if you're a really bad shot, tuning your bow is not a magic bullet that's going to make you suddenly a good shot. But it will, if you're already a good shot, it will slightly improve your accuracy. Another reason, I'm a big bow hunter, and the better your arrow is tuned to your bow, the straighter that arrow flies, the better penetration you're going to get. Also, your arrow is going to be a lot quieter in flight. So those are probably some of the main reasons that it's really important to tune your bow. Now, when bare shaft tuning, the type of target you use is really important, and I highly recommend a foam target. I think probably the worst target you can use is a bag target. In fact, if you all you have access to is a bag target, don't even do this. This right here is a compressed hay bale, and it works pretty good. It does not work as good as a foam target, but if you shoot enough arrows and you can get a general idea, it works pretty good. That's just what I've got right now. But if you don't already have a target and you're fixing to go out and buy one, I would highly recommend just getting a foam target. That's what's going to give you the most consistent results. Also, before you get into bare shaft tuning, you want to have your bow reasonably set up. And when I'm talking about this, just reasonably tuned before you get into fine tuning with a bare shaft. So before you even start, you want to get your brace height worked out. You want to get where your bow is shooting the smoothest and quietest with adjusting your string length. And I'll do another video on that if you don't know, but you want to get your brace height set. Also, if you're a split finger shooter, a Mediterranean style, a good starting point is to put your knocking point 3/8 of an inch above square. If you shoot 3 fingers under like I'm doing, I like to start out about 5/8 of an inch above square. Now that will all change, but that's just a really good starting place. Also, you want your bow to be set up just like it's going to be when you go hunting. So or if you're not a hunter, any accessories you're going to put on your bow, anything you're going to do to it, go ahead and get your bow set up with all of that before you start this. So I've got string silencers, and I've got a quiver on here with some arrows in it. I've got Velcro down here to act as silencers. You know, everything you're going to do to your bow, go ahead and get all of that set up. So when you tune it, it's exactly the way it needs to be, so you're not adding any other variables to it. There's two different ways that people bare shaft trad bows. One way is they like to shoot the arrow and then film it slow-mo with a camera, and that way they can see how the arrow flight is and make their adjustments. I don't do that. I like to just shoot a bare shaft into the target and see how it impacts. See if it's knock left or knock right or knock high or low. That's what this video is going to be about, but there is another way you can do it too, which works, but I prefer this way. Now, the first thing you really want to focus on is your release. I don't care how good your bow is tuned, if you have a bad release, you're probably not going to get good arrow flight. And I don't really have a very good release, so sometimes it's kind of frustrating. Your bow can be perfectly tuned, and some days it is shooting like a laser beam, and some days you can see that arrow kicking out again. And it's not that your bow is getting in and out of tune, it's that your release is not consistent. A really good release is going to give you much better arrow flight. Also, there's other factors that can go into bare shaft tuning. A grip. You know, you can doing everything the same. You can squeeze that bow really hard and get bad arrow flight. You can hold the grip different and get bad arrow flight. You know, so there's other factors involved in this than just having, you know, your arrow perfectly adjusted to your bow. So make sure you have a consistent grip and a consistent release before you start all this. Also, when you're doing bare shaft tuning, don't just shoot the arrow once or twice before you start making an adjustment. Have your particular arrow and you shoot it. You know, I'd shoot that arrow at least 5 or 6 times before I made a conclusion. Is the spine too weak or too stiff or knocked too high or too low? So shoot it over and over and see a consistent pattern on it. Now, also you want to hold your bow vertical. You definitely do not want to can it when you're doing this. So just hold it perfectly straight up and down. Another thing is when I'm starting out to bare shaft, I want to get the knock, the up and down, the arrow porpoising, the knock, up and down knock travel first. So first off, I mean, you can do it the other way, but I prefer to adjust knock travel height first. And after that, you know, then you can start worrying about left to right travel. A lot of guys, I don't do this, but if you're really into this and just really want to be anal about it, once you've got your bare shaft, you can weigh what your feathers would weigh, and you can take some tape and say if your feathers, I don't know, weigh 18 grains, 15 grains, whatever, with the glue and all that, you can put that amount of tape on the back of it to offset that. I don't get that particular about it, but you can do that if you want to. I would start out at 10 yards. That's probably where if you're only going to do this at one distance, I'd do it at 10 yards. And once you have it perfect at 10, you can move back to 15, then 20, then 25. You know, if you're really, really, really trying to get this good, you can go back to 30 and even beyond. But I would at least do it at 10 yards and then 15 yards. And if you want to go back farther than that, you can. When starting out bare shaft tuning, I like to get the up and down knock travel worked out of my arrow flight first. And the way you do that is when you shoot your arrow into the target and you look and you see how it impacts. I've got this exaggerated, you know, if your bow is this bad, your bow is really out of tune, but this would be a knock high. So the way you would adjust for this is you would lower your knocking point on your bowstring. If your arrow impacts the target like this, that's a knock low. Now you would raise your knocking point on your bowstring. That's really simple, but sometimes you'll get false readings, and you can have a knock high like this, and what's really, instead of lowering your knocking point, what could be happening is your arrow, when it's shooting, is too low and it's hitting the shelf and kicking up. So in a false reading knock high, you would actually want to raise your knocking point up a little bit more. So, a knock high, generally you want to lower your knocking point. Knock low, you want to raise your knocking point. For a false reading knock high, you want to raise your knocking point. Now, raising your knocking point, just do this in very small increments, and I'm talking a 32nd to a 16th of an inch at a time, and find just the perfect place. Once you've got that just how you want it, that arrow will be impacting the target, very level, just like that. Now, first off, I want to talk about adjusting for a weak-spined arrow. And a weak-spined arrow is when you shoot that arrow into the target, the nock is left. Okay? The simplest way to fix that is to jump up to the next stiffer spine. So, when you're bear shaft tuning, I suggest when looking at a chart and getting the exact arrow spine that the chart says, and when you figure that out, you're going to take your draw length, your arrow length, your point weight, and you're going to take all what that chart says, and you're going to get the exact shaft. I would buy that shaft, and then I would buy one shaft that is stiffer than that and one shaft that is weaker than that. And if you can't do that, then you can do all this other stuff, but that is the simplest way. Just try different arrow spines. Having said that, again, once you shoot that arrow in like that and you get in a left knock, that indicates a weak spine. There are a number of things you can do if you want to use that shaft. First off, you can cut that arrow shaft down. And if you've bought the arrows shafts that are way longer than you would regularly use. So the way I do that is I heat this up, pull the whole insert and point out, wrap masking tape around there, and I use a Dremel tool. I don't have an arrow shaft cutoff tool, but I cut it off, and I'd cut it off either a 1/2 inch or a 1/4 inch at a time. And then I've got an arrow squaring device tool, and I'll square it up. So let's say that I'm shooting this thing and it's weak. So I cut off a 1/2 inch and it's getting a little bit better. I cut off another 1/2 inch, it's getting a little bit better. Finally, I've got it perfect like that. Well, I know that, that's where it needs, I've shortened that arrow enough that I have stiffened the spine of it where it's hitting straight. Probably a better way to do that, because most guys are going to already have a length arrow that they want to use and they don't want to cut their arrows, is adjusting the point weight. And here again, you can heat this up, take this out. You can use heavier inserts. This is a 12 grain insert, but they make these inserts, you can get them all the way up to 100 grains. You can get these field tips, I order them from 125 to 300 grains. So if you lighten the point weight, you're stiffening your arrow. If you're making your point weight heavier, you're weakening the arrow. So in this case, if I want to do it, adjust this, I've got a knock left, weak spined arrow. So what I can do, if I just want to adjust the point weight, is start using lighter and lighter point weights. Now that doesn't always work if a guy is a hunter and he has a certain weight broadhead he wants to use, but that is another way. Just keep using lighter and lighter point weights until that straightens back out. The last way, and I really use this more for fine tuning, is on your arrow shelf, on your bow, on your leather side plate. You've got the rug rest that the arrow sits on, and the leather side plate. If you're shooting off a shelf, if you're one of these more modern guys that's using like a springy rest, if you will pull that out, if you will move the arrow away from the shelf, that is also going to compensate for weak spine. Now, everything I'm talking about is for a right-handed shooter. If you're left-handed, just reverse everything I'm saying. Now, if your knock is entering the target to the right, you've got a knock right arrow. That is indicating too stiff of a spined arrow. What I would recommend trying first is using the next weaker spined arrow and seeing how that shoots. So that's the easiest way to do this. The other way is add a heavier point weight. Just like in the last, if you had, section I talked about using a lighter weight, well, you can add a heavier weight. You can do that with a heavier insert or a heavier point weight. So the heavier you make this arrow point weight, the weaker spine you're going to have. The other thing is just like I mentioned before, you can adjust the side plate. Now on your bow, if you'll move the leather side plate closer to the riser, you're also going to weaken the arrow spine. Now you might already be up against the riser and can't go any further. That's normally the case, but if you can, if you're using a recurve bow with a springy rest or something, you can adjust that closer to the riser. Okay, I'm only at about 12 yards, just kind of starting out, but you can see this arrow is a little bit knock right. It's a little bit high. So I want to shoot this shaft about a half dozen times, and if it keeps doing the same thing, then I'll make a correction. Probably what I will do is add 50 grains to the point weight and see if that will weaken the spine enough for it to enter straight. Okay, you can see what just a little bit heavier point weight, going up 50 grains in point weight, can do. That's a pretty good arrow. I'm still only at about 12 yards, and I'd probably want to do that back to at least 25, but that's kind of what you're looking for. That looks better than the last time. When you're bare shaft tuning a bow, one other thing to consider is a recurve bow that has got more of a center shot cut out riser is easier to do. It gives you a larger range of arrows and spines that you can use. If you're using a traditional longbow, you know, you've got a grip and say it does not have this cut out riser, you're shooting pretty much right off the shelf, right off your knuckle, it's going to be a little bit harder. Still works really good, but it's not going to be as easy as a bow with a cut out center shot riser. Also, the types of arrows, you know, you've got carbon arrows, aluminum arrows, and wood arrows. It works, this technique will work with all three. Most guys shooting wood arrows don't do this. Usually if you're bare shafting, you're using either carbon or aluminum, but it will also work with wood. It's just you've got to retape. If you do cut it and shorten it each time, you've got to retaper the point end where you attach your broadhead or field point. Main thing about bare shafting is you want to take your time. You know, you don't want to rush through this. You know, you do it over several days and shoot each shaft, you know, 5 or 6 times at least before you make a decision to cut the shaft or put you a heavier weight on it. And it's, in my opinion, bare shaft tuning is the best way to tune your bow. I'm going to be doing some other videos on many other different ways to tune a traditional bow. They're good too. This just happens to be my favorite. Well, if you guys have made it this far, you might be interested in this, so please like it and subscribe it. And I've got a lot more of this kind of content coming. We'll see you next time. Let's talk about paper tuning a traditional bow today. I've been doing a series on various ways you can tune traditional bows. If you haven't seen those, you may want to go back through and look them up. But You know, I've said this before, my favorite way to tune is bare shaft tuning, but there are some very good archers, traditional archers I know of, who paper tune. Paper tuning is not my first choice for me, and it's not because it's a bad method, but I have a pluck on my release. And I don't really have a good release, but I shoot accurately because my pluck is consistent. And if you do anything in archery consistently, you're generally going to have good success. You know, if you do things one way one time and something different the next time, you're never going to be any good. But because of the way I pluck the bowstring, I get bad paper tears. If you've got a really good release, I think paper tuning is another really good method. So let me jump into this. Paper tuning a traditional bow is a little bit different than if you've ever paper tuned a compound bow. For the most part, it's very similar, but there are a few differences. I like to start paper tuning at 5 yards. After I'm getting bullet holes at 5 yards, I like to move back to 10 yards. Now, sometimes you'll get bullet holes at 5 yards and you'll move back to 10 yards and you'll be getting a tear. So, you know, that you don't need to quit there. You need to be adjusting this thing back and forth until you're getting perfect bullet holes at 5 and 10 yards. Generally speaking, if you're getting a good bullet hole at 5 and 10 yards, I think you're good and you can stop there. You know, you can move back farther and keep doing this, but in my experience with most people, that's going to lead to a lot of frustration. So I'd like to do it at 5 yards and then again at 10 yards. Another good thing about this, you know, if you live in a regular neighborhood or something, you can do this in your garage. I'm going to show how to make a paper hanging frame. And you know, you can just hang that right up in front of your target inside your garage, hang it from the ceiling. It's real easy and convenient to do. Now, all of these corrections are for a right-hand shooter. If you're a left-handed person, then just reverse what I'm telling you here. Another thing about this is every now and then you'll get a crazy situation, and maybe it's the way you're releasing, maybe it's your grip, your form, the arrows, you know, the bow, I don't know what it is, but sometimes you will experience, you know, where this doesn't work the way it's supposed to. You will actually have to make opposite corrections. You know, I have seen that happen, and I'm not really sure why, but from time to time that will happen. This chart I've drawn here kind of demonstrates what your tears are going to look like. At the top of that chart where I show knock high, you'll look at that little symbol, and the Y mark, that kind of indicates your fletching. And then if you go down to the bottom, you'll see the round circular part. That would be your point. So that knock high would be the arrow flying. You know, the point would make the round hole at the bottom, and the fletching would make the Y looking mark at the top. Just like all my other tuning videos, I suggest that the first thing you work on is getting your knock height, your up and down arrow travel worked out first. So in a case of a knock high tear, generally you would want to lower your knock point. A knock low tear, you would want to raise your knock point. Now there are special incidents. You can have a knock high, you know, and you really still need to raise your knock height up because maybe your arrow is bouncing off your shelf. So there are false indicators you can get on that. The next one is a knock left tear, and that indicates a weak spined arrow. The first thing I would do in a case like that is I would try a stiffer spined arrow. After you've tried that, the next thing I would do is you can go to a lighter point weight. If you want to cut your shafts down a 1/2 inch at a time or a 1/4 inch at a time, that will also stiffen up the spine of that. The last thing that you can do is move your rest out away from the bow, and that will also help stiffen the spine. The third one down with a knock right tear indicates a spine that is too strong. So the first thing that I would try on that is I would try a lighter spined arrow. After that, I would try different heavier point weights, and then you can move the arrow rest closer to the bow if that's possible. At the very bottom of that, that's showing what this thing ought to look like. The tear, a perfect bullet hole tear. All you ought to be seeing is just your fletching and kind of, that round part in the middle. That signifies where the knock is going. That's easier said than done, but if you've got a good release and you work on this and really fine tune it, it definitely can be done. Now this is a simple wooden frame that I have made to put my paper on when I'm paper tuning. I just attached this to the ceiling in my shop and put the target behind it. If you'll notice, I attach a weight to the bottom of it, and by doing that, that holds this thing really tight and just gives you good clean tears. Paper tuning a traditional bow is not for everybody, but if you have really good form and an excellent release, it's a good way to tune your bow. If you like this, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. This is Matt Boyette here with Buckhorn Hill Outdoors. Have a good day. Fletched shaft arrow tuning. It's another real simple way to tune a traditional bow. There's different ways like bare shaft tuning and paper tuning and numerous other ways, but this is a really simple, quick way, especially if you've already got a bunch of arrows that are sitting around the house and you just want to try different arrows out. So let's get into this. Probably the best reason I can think about that you would want to fletch shaft arrow tune instead of some of the more complicated ways like bare shaft tuning is, one would be, let's say you're just in a hurry and you just got a new bow and you just want to go out and shoot the thing. The other reason might be maybe you're like me and I've got a shop full of traditional bows, and I actually have way more bows than I have different groups of arrows. So maybe you've got several different groups, spines of arrow shafts. Maybe you've got one set that's, I don't know, it's a 300 spine, then you've got another set that's a 400 spine, you've got another set that's a 500 spine, and you really don't want to go cutting them or changing them up. You just want to grab the arrows you've got and see what shoots best out of that bow. And that's probably, if a guy's got a bunch of arrows all ready to go, and you just want to grab them and see what shoots best out of that bow, this is a real good method of doing that. Now I recommend starting out at 10 yards, and I would shoot a bunch of arrows. I wouldn't make a decision on 1 or 2 shots. I'd shoot 6 arrows at least, more is even better. But I would start at 10 yards, then I'd go back to 15 yards, then 20 yards, and keep going back as far as you are accurate. Now, if you get back to a certain point, whether it's 15 yards or 35 yards, and you're not consistent, you're really not telling yourself anything. So don't go back any farther than you can shoot good tight groups. So that's the main thing on this. these arrow adjustments are going to be for a right-hand shooter. If you're a southpaw, just do the opposite of what I'm talking about here. Now when you're doing this, if your arrows are sticking to the right of the bullseye consistently, you know, you're shooting groups and you may have a few here, but if on the average, most of them are sticking to the right, that's showing that your arrow spine is too weak. So the easiest thing to do on that, if you're like me and have a bunch of arrows, this is a 500 spined arrow, this is a 400 spined arrow. So this is a stiffer arrow. So the first thing I would do is just try a stiffer arrow. And that will move your point of impact over this way. If you don't want to do that, you can try using a lighter point weight. So dropping down in point weight is going to stiffen your arrow. So that might as well, you know, that will also do the same thing. Something else you can do is you can build your side plate up on your rest. So the further you move that arrow out from the bow, the stronger that spine is going to become. So doing all of those steps, you know, you can also cut your arrow, you know, shorten it down like you would in bear shaft tuning to stiffen it. The whole point of this, in my opinion, is to stay away from having to do that kind of thing. So, but that is another thing. So, you know, the first thing, if your arrows are hitting here, hitting to the right of the bullseye, is I'd try a stiffer spined arrow. If I didn't want to do that, I would lighten my point weight. And then you can also build your rest up out away from the bow and push that arrow a little bit farther out, and that's going to stiffen the spine as well. Now let's talk about what to do if your arrows are hitting to the left of the bullseye. It's going to be the exact opposite of what we just did. So here again, if you're shooting and the majority of your arrows are hitting to this side of the bullseye, the first thing I would do would try a weaker spined arrow. This is a 400 spine arrow. So the first thing I would do is I'd try a 500 spined arrow and see if that didn't move the impact over. Another thing I could do if I wanted to weaken that shaft is I would go up in point weight. And you know, field point weights, you know, they go from 125 grains all the way to 300 grains. And then you can, you know, your inserts are going to go from 12 grains all the way up to at least 100. So you've got plenty of options there to adjust point weight. Another thing you can do on this case, what I was talking about, just the opposite, instead of building the rest out, you can bring the leather side plate as close to the center of the bow as possible. So that's not always easy to do, but that is an option if you can do it. You know that old saying, there's lots of different ways to skin a cat. Well, that's also true for bow tuning. This may not be as involved as some of the other ways, but if the end result gets you to good arrow shooting, that's what you're looking for. Just try this. This is one of many different tools that you can use. Not going to hurt to know about this as well, and I'll see you guys next time. There's a lot of good ways to tune a traditional bow. Bear shaft tuning and paper tuning are probably some of the most common. A lot of guys, though, are just coming into this from a compound, and they're really worn out with all the tuning and tinkering with equipment. And I want to show you guys a really simple way to tune your bow. You know, I've been shooting traditional bows since the 80s when I was in high school, and back then we didn't really know about bear shaft tuning or paper tuning or any of that. We had a certain way we did it, and it worked really good. And my son shoots like that. You know, if it came down to the point where he had to bear shaft or paper tune, he probably just wouldn't even do it. But he tunes his bow this way, and he's a better shot than I am. And I know a lot of guys that just have no interest in tuning their bows, you know, getting all technical about it. They just want to get their bow shooting as good as they can, as fast as they can. There's nothing wrong with that. I understand that. So let me show you how I do this. The most important thing about this simple arrow tuning process is selecting your arrows. It is very important that you buy your arrows according to a spine calculator. So after you've studied a spine calculator closely, or a spine chart, you want to make sure that you know your exact bow poundage at your draw length, you know, not just at 28 inches, but at your draw length, the arrow point weight you're going to use, and the length of the arrow. So let's start out doing that. Let's pick what spine that chart tells us. And then if you can buy one spine weaker and one spine stiffer than that, that will help. You know, if you're not interested in this and you just want to do this as fast as possible, we'll just buy the spine they recommend. But for a test, I'd recommend buying 3 different spines. When you get your arrows, you know, obviously you're not going to want to bare shaft and cut your arrows. So I would measure, you know, after you draw your bow back, I would give myself about an inch clearance from the back of the point to the front of the bow. So, you know, figure out what your draw length is and add you about an inch to it. Now, when selecting your arrow point weight, there's a few things to consider. If you're a hunter and you're going to use broadheads, you want your point weights to match exactly what your broadheads are going to be. Now, if you can't find any field points that weigh what your broadheads weigh, you're not out of luck, because there are so many different weight inserts that if you fiddle around with it long enough, you're going to come up with a combination where you can get your broadhead to weigh the exact same as your field point. Now, when you get ready to tune your bow, you need to get a bow square. It is, I would say, virtually impossible to tune your bow without one of these. It's basically just a ruler. It's a real simple device, and you need to get that. If you're going to use a brass knock point, you need to get some knock pliers. I tie my knocking points on with serving, where I can just twist them up and down the string and then set them with super glue, so you can do that too. But to begin with, let me talk about knock point height. That is going to control the up and down movement of your arrow. And to measure that, you put your bow square on there, and if you're going to shoot split finger, I recommend starting out, if you've never done this before, start out about 3/8 of an inch above square. If you're shooting 3 under, I recommend starting about 5/8 of an inch above square. Now, there's no right or wrong place on there. It's just where you get your best arrow flight. Now, the knock height, it's going to control the up and down movement of the arrow. Now, for those who don't know, the brace height is the distance from the deepest part, the throat of your grip, to your string. And the easiest way to measure that, like I said, is a bow square. And you would just clamp that onto your string, and you can measure all the way over there. And that helps you shorten and lengthen the string and really adjust that in. And once you find your sweet spot, you can mark it or write your recordings down somewhere, and you'll know exactly, you know, where that bow shoots best. After you unstring it, you can always return to that same spot. Now, I like to adjust this arrow side to side knock travel by adjusting the brace height. You know, first off, I like to adjust the up and down travel by moving the knock point up and down. And then after I've got that where I want it, I'll adjust the side to side arrow flight with brace height adjustments. And the way you do that is you unstring your bow, and if you have a Flemish twist string, you really need a Flemish twist string to get the most out of this. But if you untwist it, you can lengthen the string and shorten the brace height. If you twist it, you will be shortening the string and making the brace height greater. Now, you don't want to untwist it too much and, you know, have problems there, but I would recommend going between 6.5 at a minimum to 10.5. Now, somewhere in the middle of that is going to be a sweet spot. So what I like to do, I get a new bow and I don't know anything about it. I will set my brace height about 6.5 inches, and I'll shoot 3 or 4 times. and I'll look at that Aeroflight, and I'll put about 3 or 4 twists in it. I'll unstring it, put about 3 or 4 twists in it, shoot it a couple of more times, unstring it, and I'll keep doing that process till I get to about 10 inches. And somewhere in there between 6.5 inches and 10 inches, there is going to be a magical sweet spot for that bow. The hand shock is going to be better. It's going to shoot quieter. The Aeroflight is just going to really, I mean, you can have really bad Aeroflight, and when you find that sweet spot, it ought to just be shooting like a laser. So, you know, this takes time. Also, you know, a lot of times I do that first before I put my string silencers on there. And after I've got that thing pretty close, then I'll put my string silencers on the bow and kind of fine tune it. And you will, if you've done this without putting your string silencers on it, and then you put your string silencers on, it may change that spot a little bit. But anyway, brace height is how you control the left to right movement. Moving your knock point up and down is how you control your up and down Aeroflight. Now, I recommend using bright feathers when you do this. The better you can see your arrow and the feathers, the easier this is. Also, if you can fletch your arrows where all 3 feathers are the same color and you don't have an odd color top feather, that seems to help too. I like to do this about 15 yards. If you do it much farther than that, the arrow is going to start correcting itself and errors are going to be harder to see. If you're too close, you know, like 10 yards, your bow is shooting so fast it can be kind of hard to see too. So, you know, do it about 15 yards, and it really helps if you have a friend watch, and maybe with a slow motion camera film what you're doing. This is not, in my opinion, as precise or as good as bear shaft or paper tuning, but if a guy just wants to get his bow, set it up as fast as he can, and go out and shoot the same day, this is the way I think he needs to do it. You know, sometimes less is more, and I think this is a good way to do it. This is an easy and fast way to tune your traditional bow. It may not be as refined as other methods like bear shaft tuning, but it works good. I promise you, back in the 80s and early 90s, all the deer and hogs I shot didn't know any difference. If you like this, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.